Hi everyone, congrats on making it through the basics of Dionysophy. For this final episode, we're going to talk about what makes Dionysophy stand out from, let's say, analytical psychology, that's the depth psychology from the works of Carl Jung, or internal family systems. Because I have not presented any concept that exceed those two frameworks. And that's totally fair. In fact, this is something I claim. I want Dionysophy to be in continuity with those two frameworks. In fact, I picked the theory and the practice depending on whichever worked best for me. So for instance, IFS does not talk about dreams. So I'm going to go to Carl Jung. In fact, I'm going to go to Robert Johnson and get the practice there. And if active imagination is too difficult for me to understand from those works, I'm going to go to internal family system because that worked best for me. The goal, whichever frameworks you pick, is to learn to relate those figures in the unconscious and to understand them at a psychological level. That's what we want to get to. And see, like most people start this work, I would say at a cerebral level, and I much rather go with the feeling value and the eros. If I have a dream, usually just getting the feeling out of the symbol is enough. I don't need to go into theory. Of course, that's not always true. Sometimes you need the theory. I don't know, if you have a dream about something that's black, well, you can go into Jung's work and see that in alchemy, the blackness means something. It means something like the initial state of the prima materia. So that's the unconscious in its chaotic, unknown, undiscovered state, right? So if you have a black figure, that's what it means. It's an aspect of the unconscious that as of now is unknown or undiscovered or not understood consciously. Still, the problem with this kind of method is it can go anywhere. It can go everywhere. If you read Jung's work, you know what I'm talking about. So you're going to still need to establish the feeling value with the symbol because it's going to tell you like, yes, it can go there. No, it can't go there. For complex symbols like, I don't know, snake, dragon, moon, something like this, you will need that feeling value to guide you through the process of what's called amplification, visiting all the meanings that these symbols have in religion, mythology, fairy tales. So, when you learn to deal with symbols like this, you're going to encounter two specific categories of symbols that need extra care. The first one are religious symbols, and the second one are erotic symbols. For religious symbols, let's say you dream about a cross or about Christ or Buddha. Well, there's a long tradition of those symbols, so you're going to have to, try to really understand what's going on. Thankfully, Jung has done a lot of work on those symbols, so it makes it possible. The second category are erotic, sometimes even, pornographic symbols. And this one, frankly, they're hard to explain, they're hard to understand. What does a phallus mean at a psychological level? We know, that's not the same thing as the biological level. What does a vagina mean at a psychological level? What does intercourse mean at a psychological level? And it's really uncomfortable, but there's quite a lot of dreams about incest. And what does that mean at a psychological level? Because this has nothing to do with the biological level. So erotic symbols need a special and extra care, and it's hard to work with them. Now, this is still not what makes Dionysophy special. What I want to bring out in Dionysophy is, by working so much with symbols, I've started to see an extraverted dimension to symbols. This is not going to be easy to explain, so please bear with me. I suppose the easiest way to explain this is to go to Japan. I've explained this in one of my Living Symbols episode, and I say that after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we can see Godzilla emerge in popular culture. Now, even if you know nothing about psychology, most people will say yeah, of course, Godzilla has been created by what happened, by the atomic bombings, right? There's this nuclear anxiety that has been created like this. So we already have this intuition that this symbol has been created by an event, in this case, a psychological event, right? Well, that's perfectly fine. But because I approach symbols differently, well, when I look into Godzilla, first I see a water creature. All right, so we're dealing with something coming out of the unconscious. Then it's gigantic. And, I know that giants and oversized creatures are loaded with psychic energy. Then is a prehistoric dinosaur. And that means it's an archaic content of the psyche. And so basically, Godzilla is a nuclear leviathan, right? It's an undomesticated force that has come out of the unconscious, and it both protects and destroys the Japanese psyche, depending on which movie you look at. And so the conclusion is that there's a very strong force, almost a mutation of consciousness that's happening in the Japanese psyche. And that is obvious when you look at the kind of anime and video games that come out of this country since the atomic bombings. So I've done a similar analysis with Kong. I'm looking at Kong as a symbol of the American psyche, and I show how it is a chthonic force that if you bring it too close to consciousness, well, it gets killed. I've dedicated a fairly long analysis to it, and I show how it's a problem, how it's not good, and how we could look for some kind of solution. So that's how symbols are created at a collective level. I'm really interested in that. But it's also happened at the individual level. I'm going to take myself as an example here. The world of entertainment is basically infinite. There's so many movies, books, video games, and something like this. So the way a given individual will find certain works, well, that might say something about them more than about the medium itself. Let me explain. I've always been interested in some works, some, and not others. So I've always loved Japanese culture, despite the fact I'm Swiss. Well, what does that say about me? And about music, I've always liked music with an edge. What does it say about me? Now, saying that subjectivity is present in the way we consume media, that's not a big insight. I get it. But in my life, I've seen that some of the works I've been influenced of, or that matter to me, they kind of reappeared in dreams. They kind of reappeared as themes to process in my life. And I know this is not going to make sense, but I've seen this with other people. For instance, my wife, I don't know, she finds a movie and suddenly 9 months later, she decides, oh, we should watch it. And then, boom, on screen, we have a theme that's being worked out and that's actually responding to our conditions. So I'm not exactly sure what to make out of this, outside of the fact that, movies are kind of like dreams. So it seems that we watch movies because we experience them in that kind of dimension. We're getting an experience. We enter a universe of symbols. Video games are the same. And we process some kind of theme through it. We kind of get insight and wisdom, and it prepares us for the next step in life. So for me, it's very clear that those, those world of symbols can be a source of self-knowledge. Or at least it's got my attention and I want to develop this. Otherwise, if you're not convinced, you can also look at those world of symbols as a source of suffering. So for instance, you can be addicted to video games, right? You can be addicted to virtual experience, well, symbolic experience. You can be addicted to pornography. Well, what are those? Well, people might say it's just dopamine. I would disagree with that and say there's something in the symbols, in the fetishes that we get that's important. So that's another aspect of the work that's much more, more serious. There's a suffering that can be created between the individual and the symbols, and we're going to look for integrative methods to try to work this out. Anyway, that's what I'm working on, the extraverted dimension of symbol, and that obviously includes things like synchronicity. Now, if this interests you, now I'm going to go through some of the projects I have so you know kind of where I'm at. Let's start with my first website, Dream Sanctuary. On this website, you find a lot of videos and articles. Everything is free, so just check it out. One of the articles I want to point attention to is this one, a visual guide to Jung's later work. And if you go to this link, you'll get into this. This is a mind map. It's kind of like a upside down tree where you start here. I suggest some prerequisites. Then you go into the red book, and from the red book, I suggest a study tree with works that have influenced me, and let's say a therapy or self-knowledge part with all kind of topics and works that have interested me as well. And at the bottom, some more recommendation. So you can check this out. And if you are interested here, there's a link to a Discord server. You can come there and chat with me, us. We're a small community. It's a bit quiet, but that's one way to get in touch. Otherwise, obviously I have Dionysophy. That's my current effort. If you are only interested in the free section, go into living symbols. You get the kind of episodic discussion I'm making. There's 9 episodes as of today. The last one is on Kong. It's pretty long, 1 hour 10. You can find me on X at Dionysophy. And sometimes on X I write some threads, and I've decided to archive them on Substack. So this is much easier to read than X. If you have found values in what Dionysophy is, you're welcome to join the community. This is paid, and once you pay for it, you would get access to some of the videos I make there. So as of today, there's 12, 14, 15 videos. Those are the one from 2026, and those are the one from 2025. I make once a month. There's an additional here. Dionysophy is like a house I'm building, step by step. I've laid the foundations, and now it can go pretty much any way. I've never been able to predict where it's going. If I had an idea or an inkling, I would say it would be great that I interact with more people, either people, I don't know, on social media or with users, so I can show how this process works. Because yes, I can talk about my dreams, I can talk about what interests me, but sometimes having someone else creates a dialogue, and you can see how the process of dream interpretation, for instance, goes. I think it would be interesting. We'll see where it goes. Right now, the next topic is going to be about Saturn. So yeah, I'm doing what interests me, and it goes fairly wide. At this point, I think you have a good overview of where Dionysophy came from, where it's at, and where it could potentially go. It started with Dream Sanctuary. That was a very intense moment in my life where I really worked on dreams, and it kind of informed a symbolic worldview that now I'm turning outwards and seeing that people are inside those symbol systems, and what does it mean, right? Movies, video games, even the internet to a large degree is a symbol system. And then we can do the work of self-knowledge on those symbols, and we can also have to work with some suffering, right? You might be stuck on the internet and you can't go out of it, because that's where you find things that you can't find in your real life. With generative AI and large language models, you might see that AI play a big role of building relationship with things on the virtual world, and for me, virtual world is a world of symbols. But at a fundamental level, Dionysophy is pretty simple. It's about living a normal life while maintaining a dual stewardship. So the first one is how you feel, and you want to make sure that the decision you take with your ego are in tune with how you feel. That would be the first alignment. And the second alignment is, let's say you have a dream, a nightmare, therefore you have a tension between consciousness and the unconscious, and you want to resolve that productively. And so that's what it's about. It's about taking the totality of your phenomenal experiences and making sure they inform the conscious decision-making process. So the ego should be informed from all the layers that you are, from the kind of shallow level to the deepest level available, to make sure everything is correctly aligned. There you have it. That's what I have to offer with Dionysophy. Maybe it interests you, maybe it doesn't. Hope you got something out of it, and who knows, maybe we'll see each other again. Thanks for your attention and take care.